History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells of people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important, history tells a people where they still must go, what they still must be. The relationship of history to the people is the same as the relationship of a mother to her child.
Hey guys, good to see y'all here. You know, in the last several weeks, we've been hearing a whole lot about education bans, specifically in Florida, but Florida is not the only place where education in terms of African American studies is under attack. And if you all remember, this goes all the way back to when they first started talking about critical race theory, right? So a lot of people didn't know what that was and like what is, like, why is there a focus on critical race theory. But the way that it was framed at the time when it first came up was kind of like, you know, it was kind of like they were trying to make you believe that critical race theory was being taught to elementary school kids and that it was just too much and it was, you know, kids didn't need to hear all of that information. But the truth is it was college courses, right? So, you know, that was the first sign that there would be some attempt to sort of pick apart whatever is being taught to young people about Black folks and African history and our history in this country, so on and so forth. So we kind of were watching it. Yeah, we knew it was happening. We were paying attention. We knew it was happening. And then as time has progressed, there have been many attempts to shut down any type of knowledge, if you will, or professors, teachers, and others from being able to teach real, like true history in schools. So, you know, as we were focused and trying to pay attention to what was going on, DeSantis, the governor of Florida, really sort of ramped up his attack, right? And so that's where most of us come into knowledge about this, right? Like most of us are aware when we hear DeSantis now saying that there would be a curriculum that is going to be banned in Florida because the curriculum had, and it was a number of things, you know, he talked about defunding the police, I think, being a part of it. It was something else that was before we got to him using the one specific thing that we knew would be a trigger for Black folks that are still working through processing, you know, the LGBTQIA role in our civil rights history and all of that. So that's still a major debate in our community that we're working through. But he knew that, so he used it. But there were other things. It was like, what was it? It was defund the police, and it was something else. I can't remember. But anyway, there was a whole other point that he made, you know, where he was just pretty much trying to say this is not something that needs to be taught in schools.
And I just wanted to say to your point, the interesting thing about it is these attacks are always happening.
Right. And well, first of all, folks already pretty much know that you are
co-founder of Until Freedom, Angelo Pinto.
That's right.
But these attacks are always happening, right? And oftentimes what happens is just like when we talk about policing or any other issue, it's not until someone makes a direct attack that we say, hold on, wait, this is happening. And it kind of wakes people up to what's taking place. And I think that the context is important. Black folks in this country, it was illegal to read.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's been a historic context about attacking our ability to learn in a broader context. And today, when you look at someone like DeSantis, the governor of Florida, this is a modern iteration of that attack on one's ability to learn. And I believe, to your point, most of the things that folks are fearing when they say critical race theory, a lot of people had issues with the 1619 Project.
Absolutely. All of this new 1619 Project was under attack still.
All this new information that is trying to trouble the way in which folks are taught and say there's a lot of pieces missing with regards to how education, particularly the history of Black folks historically across the globe, are taught. and we want to bring some new information into the fray. We're not, of course, this information is not going to ever take precedent on how much else is taught in school.
Of course not.
So we're introducing
We're always
stuff.
going to
Yes.
be taught about everyone else's history, and particularly European history. They have no problem teaching us that, and it is done through their lens. Give you an example. They tell you that Christopher Columbus discovered America. Well, we really know, we learned, which we knew already, that he did not. But also while we were in Africa, we learned just how much of a role Christopher Columbus and those men played in our enslavement. Like, this is, but they don't teach you that. They don't even talk about it, right? They don't tell you about some of the things in terms of the Queen and her lineage, and Britain's role and the Portuguese role, their first role, right? So they were the first people to invade Africa. And we don't learn all of that. And there's a reason why they don't want you to know that. And by the way, when we say that there are folks who want to trouble the waters, and they want to make sure that we learn more about our history, a big part of it is that those individuals see the larger context of everything that's happening. Police violence, which ultimately stems from slave patrols, which is how it began to where it is now, and hasn't really changed much, especially for the African American community. But and then also even the violence within our own community, and how easy it is for some of us to kill and harm one another. There are people who believe that if we are taught more about our history, then we will not be so agitated, frustrated, violent, angry, or whatever with one another. We will be able to own and to, I don't know, some of these principles, like the Kwanzaa principles, some of the principles that we learned while we were there in Africa. These are principles that were used for, whatever, since the beginning of our existence, to help us deal with trauma, to help us deal with issues within, interpersonal conflicts within our community. And so there's teaching us our history, or learning our history, will help us to deal with a number of issues that we have. And there are people who know that.
And the thing is, they always say our people perish for a lack of knowledge, right? And when you, as far back as you can go in many cultures, one of the things you see that's a reoccurring theme is know thyself. This is just a general principle that most cultures say. You have to know yourself, because then the world looks different to you. The way you approach the world looks different, right? And I think the interesting piece, that's another piece of this, that a lot of this is happening during Black History Month.
Absolutely.
Right? During the 1 month of the year where they say they're going to focus a little bit on our history. And that the reframing is important. You mentioned Columbus and discovery. And the interesting piece, I didn't learn this until I went to law school, that discovery is an actual doctrine. It doesn't mean discovery in the context like, oh, you just found it. That's not what it means. It has a very unique definition according to the law. You see what I'm saying? So unless essentially, it's too much to go into now. But there was a doctrine that had to be made law in order for them to say they discovered things. Because there were people there. And what happened was the people who were there at some point started to realize how they were acquiring pieces of land and said, oh, we're going to do that too. So that way they don't take all our stuff.
Right.
So they got so educated and they started to understand the tactics of their oppressor. And then they said, okay, let's just do what they're doing to protect ourselves. And then the folks said, okay, we have to legislate and put something into law to give us credibility over what we're doing, the way in which we're performing illegal activity. But the other thing that's deep is, it's deep. The other thing that
they make laws that protect them against us, but allows them to oppress us and discriminate against us.
Which is why it's such a fight.
And steal our shit.
And it's an added layer of protection, right? Because it's not just the law, it's also, in many ways, the court of public opinion, right? Because it's like reparations. The law protects them as we try to now fight for this, but it's also the court of public opinion. I don't know if Black people should get this. And part of this kind of education, right? And one of the ideas that they constantly attack is this idea of being woke.
That's to stop woke act.
So when you listen to the narrative,
DeSantis specifically said that Florida is the place that woke comes to. He said that.
What's deep about that is though, right? Even, and I know a lot of people have issues because it's like, oh, you think you're so woke, all this stuff, right? It just means you know. I mean, it's like,
to be woke is to be in the know.
you can't just be aware of a thing. It's actually problematic, or people feel it's deep. People feel like it's an attack. It's threatening for people just to know.
Just to know.
Just to know who you are is a threat. Just to know your history is a threat to something. That's how deep it is. We're not saying people are going to go out there and we're not even pushing people to go protest Texas. We're just saying just make yourself aware.
But
that's a threat.
Let me just give you this other angle, because this is how I got into this situation, right? I was just listening back and forth, because again, I kept hearing people say, oh, they want to teach you, they're teaching us about, or they're trying to encourage people to be gay and using African American studies to do that.
Right.
I was like, that don't sound right to me. Like, I hear
fake news.
I said, this sounds like a gimmick. It sounds like something where people are using your trigger as a way to, and then I saw Black folks
Jump
that
on the bandwagon.
talking about, well, you know, I don't like DeSantis, but it's one thing that he's saying here that I agree with, and it doesn't matter. And I said, let me go read the curriculum myself. So I went and found it, because I also saw that a person that I really love pulled up, used the clip from the news, the press conference.
Okay.
They used the clip of what they itemized, right? So they itemized his issues. DeSantis was doing the press conference, and they itemized his issues with the curriculum.
Sure.
And that was being used in the coverage that this one individual was doing when speaking about why he agreed with DeSantis about this. And I said, so what you're telling me is that you're using what they provided from their press conference. Yeah, their talking points. Yeah. Let me go read the actual curriculum. Yeah. So I get into the curriculum, and I'm like, this is actually really good. There's holes.
Sure.
You know, I said a few things. I had issues, right? I was like, what? No, not a lot of issues, but there was one thing that I did notice. There was a lot of Black women this and Black women that, and, you know, African women and this and that. And I was like, I love that. That has to happen. I understand that in a patriarchal society, it is necessary for us to really push forward the stories of Black women and what we've done, because we are often left out of the conversation. And I get it. When you're starting from nothing, you've got to really push it forward. But I still think that people need to hear their name called. Yeah. So a Black man needs to also see something that he can identify with directly, so that he does not have his ego and his triggers, or even, you know, his your emotional sentiment saying, well, where the hell is
Where am I?
Yeah. Everybody, when you're in church and the pastor is speaking, the pastor will call out different people's names while preaching. You know, hey, Ramin, yeah, you know, this and that, Jules. You know what I'm saying? He will call out.
He's inviting you to the conversation.
Because maybe you snickering and playing too much, and you need to be drawn in.
That's right.
Maybe you're my amen corner, and what you saying, I hear you, you feeling me, so I'm going, you know, let's keep tag team, right? That's what they do. I went, call my name, right? I get that. You
call and response. That's so deep. Because when you call the name, then people respond to, they show up.
So I saw that as being a potential issue. But overall, what I know is that with all of the issues that I'm sure the curriculum, and I know you had some things where you like, well, I see this and that, and third, and Reverend Mark Thompson and others had little things, notes about issues.
It could be better.
But it's better than what they teach today. Okay. What they teach today is damn near nothing.
Pretty much.
And that is extensive. And it's an AP course. This is for young people who are now getting ready to go to college. Yes. These are kids that are on a higher scale learning track. Yeah. This is the type of information they need. And when they learn it, they can teach it to their mamas and daddies, to their little brothers and sisters, and they can spread the information. I thought it was great. So then I said, let me post the actual screenshots of the curriculum. And I posted it, and I said, don't allow these people to use your own issues and challenges against us to where we are cutting off our own nose, right? Right? We're spiting our own head, cutting off our own nose. And I said, don't do it. And then people start saying, well, I want to learn this. Can I learn this? This is amazing. Where do we get this? How do I download it? People start DMing me, texting me. And I'm talking about some folks that, there are people, I got all kinds of people that follow me.
I know.
And there's some people that follow me that, they do a lot of things. And studying history is not one of the things they do. But even they were hitting me up like, yo. And then next morning, somebody that is really like totally on a different life track, text me and said, hey, is there a way that I can get this so I can start teaching to my kids? And as soon as I text all of y'all and I said, we have to find a way to provide some of this curriculum to our community, right? We need to figure out how to do it. And so for the last few weeks, since this dialogue has been happening, folks, we have been working diligently. Our team, along with, as I mentioned, Reverend Mark Thompson, who is a historian in his own right. He studied under some of the greats, Dr. Ben Johakin, Dr. John Henry Clark. He studied Reverend Jesse Jackson and a number of incredible leaders. And Ira Carruthers. And he was a part of us building out what we're doing for the next 6 weeks. Yeah. So why don't you tell folks, because, I'm still trying to learn it myself.
We're all learning. I think that what's important and what we try to do is the curriculum in Florida, whether you have some challenge with it or not, is very comprehensive. Mm-hmm. It's a comprehensive curriculum, 4 units, and it's over probably 150 actual classes, right? Actual classes in this curriculum. And I think for us, what we wanted to say is how do we give people a little flavor of that to get a taste of this information so that then we can explore where we can take it, right? Because part of the challenge, to your point, is most schools don't have this, right?
And they need it younger in an AP course.
And it's an AP course, and we know
everybody doesn't have access.
Most Black students are not brought into AP courses, right? So oftentimes, even the curriculums that we're seeing, most Black students aren't even getting this. And we know we're going to have a fight because at least 33 states are passing some form of legislation to attack learning in some capacity, whether it's banning books, attacking curriculum. We know students at universities are fighting for African-American studies programs still 30, 40, 50 years later. We know this is all the context of what's happening for Black folks in America. And what we're trying to do is not only address this legislation and these other pieces, but we're saying, can we do something now?
Right
so that folks can get something.
Because that's the other thing heard. There were people who said, I think Luke was one of the...
Okay. Look at that.
Luke. He was one of those that said, which I don't agree with, but still, his point. There was
a Florida native. He's a Florida native.
He was saying, DeSantis did the best thing because we need to teach our own kids. So, some of us don't even know. Some of us don't know it to teach it, right?
And not only that, it's true, but most of our kids in public education.
Right. And by the way, if they could teach you about their queen, then we can learn about our queens as well.
All of them.
So let's not so to hell with that, because if you're not stopping them from teaching history in general, then we should be fighting that in every crevice of this country, every place where you go. Our contribution is respected, and that we are also told the story of before we became enslaved, right? So I pushed back from that, but he was right that we should be,
and that's what we're about to do.
And that's
you gonna learn today.
You gonna learn today.
It's true.
Which is, my sisters. Oh my God, our sisters in Mount Vernon. Lord, her name escapes me, but I will not forget because I'm gonna post it after this live. One of our sisters that works with the mayor in Mount Vernon, Mayor Sean Patterson Howard, exactly. She's the one who called me and was like, I feel like we should do something. You're gonna learn today. And I called her back. I said, wait, can I use that? And she's like, yeah, can I borrow? And you know what? Collective works.
Listen, it's the only thing that's gonna get us through.
She said, take it. So,
and to the point, In our classes, that's essentially what we tried to do. So if you have an opportunity to look at the Florida curriculum, one of the things you'll see is the first unit really focuses on African history, right? Or ancient Africa. And as you mentioned, there are folks who look at that and still have challenges. And part of what we're doing is bringing in a historian, Dr. Browder, to reframe early African history. And that's really our first course, to introduce people to what we're doing, but also say, there is some context around African history that exists, but even that needs a bit of reframing. We need to look at that differently. And Anthony Browder will be doing that. In the curriculum, after this discussion around African history, what they go right into is the transatlantic slave trade.
Absolutely.
And one of the things we do in our classes is we discuss the transatlantic slave trade too, but we discuss it through maroon communities. So the places and spaces where there was resistance.
People fighting back.
Right, to what they were
Because
experiencing.
slavery was not a choice.
It was not.
Just
Not at all.
FYI.
And
There were people fighting.
it's deep. Most black folks globally were not enslaved, even while slavery was happening. And then a good majority of those folks who were experiencing enslavement were resisting. Right? And you have maroon communities, or they call palenques and freedom towns, all across North and South America, where folks were constantly resisting. You had folks on the continent resisting. So we have a course around maroonage that will be taught by Melissa Vaughn that will dive into some of that history. And then after the conversation around the slave trade and what's happening, there's a conversation around the history of resistance and kind of our road to liberation as black folks. Where you'll see a class around reparations by Dr. Winbush.
Because reparations, a lot of people think it's a check. And it's more than a check.
And a lot of people don't realize the conversation for reparations was happening as slavery was happening. There was black folks, and you can look at the history of the Amistad, which is familiar to most folks, but they're like, we want to go back now. And that was part of a conversation, an earlier conversation around what reparations could look like. Repairing the harm is really just what it means broadly. We talk about it now oftentimes in the context of a check, but it's much broader than that. And folks were having this conversation for hundreds of years now, right? And actually, of course, the deep thing about it is the only repair that we often see is the repair that black folks have done for ourselves. But we're talking about what does it look like for the folks who caused the harm to also repair us.
And for the country we built to pay us.
For heaven's sakes, right? And then there's a conversation with, your mentor and friend, Dr. Cora Masters-Berry, around the U.S. Constitution.
Absolutely. And she's specifically focusing on the intersection between the U.S. Constitution and black folks, right? How it impacts us. Not just teaching the Constitution to teach it so you just know how to recite it, but no, where are the places and spaces that have caused us harm, again, and places and spaces that we don't exploit enough in order to receive true liberation. So that's actually a really deep class. I think you skipped one, because what about the love?
Well, there are two other courses that speak to kind of freedom dreaming and protest. So we have a course on collective freedom dreaming by Dr. Shamel Bell. And then we have a course on student protest and the birth of Black studies by Dr. Joyce King. So these courses, for me, kind of speak to the last unit that you see kind of in the Florida curriculum, where they're talking about what's happening now and in recent history to resist and really to liberate Black folks and to create our own. And I think that's what you'll see here, this idea of what is student protest and the birth of Black studies. As we mentioned, not only do we see Black learning under attack in K through 12, but Black college students have fought for African American and Africana studies for decades now, and they're under attack. And every year there are schools who lose their programs. But it's Black protest and student protest movements that even created that and gave life to that, and it's directly connected to what we're seeing happening across the country, so that's important. And then this idea of collective freedom dreaming, to your point, even this idea of this curriculum and what does it mean for Black folks to learn, and how sometimes we get in conflict as we see something that could potentially be a tool for our liberation. And then the question really becomes, how do we dream together? How do we create freedom together? And even if you look at, we talked about maroonage and other communities and how we've resisted historically, we had to find the spaces and places where we could be united collectively in solidarity. And I feel like freedom dreaming gives us a lot of that. Some people, sometimes we don't value that, and we undervalue how important solidarity is. But from our families to our partners to our communities to institutions, a lot of the challenges we face is because we're not in solidarity. And even when you see a curriculum like this, there's no curriculum you will probably see where you say everything there is great.
That period.
Because not only because a man has done it and people have flaws and there's things you're going to see, but part of it is because our history has not been told for so long.
Right.
What kind of curriculum
that's powerful
you going to have that tells the story of the people who ain't been told before all the years?
That's so powerful. 500. But and
curriculum
and
cheap
movies, curriculum, classes, whatever you want to call it, conversations are all meant for you to do more digging, for you to educate yourself even more, to even try to travel to the places and spaces and touch the ground. It's not meant to give us the full story, because we've never been taught the truth and the full story about anything. And even in your own families, mom and daddy gonna tell you a lot of what happened. But there's some things they're not going to cover. And you gonna leave some things out when you're talking to your children, your friends, and other people as well. That's the nature of humans. Sometimes you forget. Sometimes you don't remember. I'm in the process of writing my memoir. And, at first I was just like, yeah, that happened that way. And then when I had to read back, I said, no.
This
thing's missing. Yeah. The timeline is not. So it has to, it's a
context.
It's constant learning, constant reading, constant writing, constant exploration. And that's what this whole thing is about. So I'm not teaching. I'm going to be learning with you. But we have 6 incredible instructors that have the knowledge and the information to bring you closer to your understanding of who we are, where we come from. And for 6 weeks, beginning next week, so, right now you all are hearing us, and this is a preview, if you will, of what you can expect. But beginning next week, the classes begin at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where you can go and sign up. Now, freedom ain't free, y'all. Unfortunately, we would love to provide this for free, but we need to pay the instructors for their time. We have to, make sure we keep things going so that we can keep it going. And we want to extend this. We want to continue these classes and keep this type of information coming out of Until Freedom's Academy, because we do have the Until Freedom Academy, which is where we train people in protesting and resistance, and we train people around the country. And this is a new area for us. So the classes are $249 for 6 classes. You really can't pay for a knowledge of self, right? You can't. So hopefully $249 is something that everybody out there will say, you know what, I'll get it, because guess what? You can have your family come over. You can, show the classes to your children. And then if you say, well, I don't really like all those things. I know some of it. I'm not interested in some of it. $65 is the price for individual classes. And you have information over here that will tell you exactly, and down here in the comment section.
And you can go to the
bit.ly link. And it's in our bios. You can get information on how you sign up. That's going to be everywhere for you to figure out how to tap in. So.
And we always say, invest in yourself. We want people, when folks give to us, we look at it as an investment, but ultimately it is an investment in yourself.
Absolutely.
Invest in your education, invest in your family's education. And one of the things that Elder used to tell me all the time, which is so true, the most important education is the one you give yourself. So as you get these classes and you begin to embark on this awareness of information, hopefully it sparks into you a thirst to begin to explore more things
and
as
to
we
teach.
discuss.
And to teach, because as soon as you know something, you become a teacher.
Each one teach one.
Each one teach one.
Right.
So it is beginning February 23rd. That is next Thursday at 7 p.m. We will be starting with the first session, which is going to be all about early African history. So it's taking you back before we became enslaved.
Yes.
And, you know, I hope that all of you, $249 for 6 sessions, will get involved. We are going to, as time goes on, you know, find a way to help people who can't afford it
Yes.
to get access to these sessions as well. And so if you're listening and you just want to help out and you say, I don't want to take the classes at all, make the
Sponsor
payment,
somebody.
sponsor somebody, give the classes to another person as a gift, or contact us and say that that's something that you want to do. So that's the deal for the rest of Black History Month.
You gonna learn today.
You're going to learn today 6 classes, $249 or $65 per class, learning a lot about our history, much more to learn. But hopefully this will help us to be able to offset what they're trying to do, where they're, on one hand, they are, you know, they're trying to ban us from learning our history. But guess what? They know it. And let me tell you guys, 2 quick things. One of the people, we have to make sure we give a shout out to our sponsor. We did get our first sponsor. Well, I don't know. Let me not do that because maybe she didn't say she wanted to be mentioned yet.
Maybe next time.
The next time. We'll make sure to post it next time. But I was going to say she was the one that contacted me that also encouraged me to say, hey, y'all got to find a way to teach this.
That's
right?
one way or another.
Y'all have to find a way to teach this. When she made it was her and the person that's totally off track that encouraged me. But what I know from the conversation I had with this woman is that the real issue is not even that they don't want us to learn our history, because they pretty much believe that at some point you'll come into contact with somebody that'll tell you something.
Sure,
right?
sure.
You say at some point your grandmama know a little bit. You might meet a friend. You might learn
man on the
something
corner
from
with the book.
Angelo. You might get a guy selling or in Harlem, Brooklyn, anywhere, walking up down the street, somebody have a book. Somehow you got the autobiography of
Malcolm
Malcolm
X
X in your hand. Somehow, they figured maybe you'll tap in a little bit.
Yeah.
But what they don't want, because you said something important earlier, that AP classes, our kids don't always have access to.
Underrepresented.
So whose kids do you think are in those classes? What they don't want is the sympathy
That's good.
and the concern and the understanding from their
That's
children
good.
about our history and what this country has done to us and what those colonizers from around the world did to our people. So this is more so about stopping their children from learning it
That's
than
good.
it is from stopping us from knowing our history, because they think we should be smart enough to teach our own.
And that's important because these classes are for everybody.
It's for everybody. So if you are, whoever you are right now, you can take these classes from any community and get more understanding. You know,
You
and
need
it's
to
the
learn
last
today.
thing I will say, you need to learn too, right? The last thing I'll say is I was watching Kellyanne Conway's daughter during the presidential election,
Gotcha.
the second term,
Yes.
when Trump was trying to be president the second term. And her daughter was going crazy. She was on TikTok filming her family, talking about them being hypocrites. I can imagine that when she wasn't on camera, she was even worse. She was exposing the bullshit,
Gotta be.
right? Like she
Someone
wants
had
to, and she's not alone. There are other white kids that have been
Allies.
pushing back
Accomplishments, maybe.
well, you know, that depends on what they're still doing now.
That's
They
true.
were allies, at least, that they raised the issue to their parents and let the world know that my parents are wrong for supporting a bigot, right? They did that. When you
That's
become an
good.
ally is when you actually physically
Do
get
something.
in the
Right,
fight.
get in the
So
fight.
we'll see, right? I mean, well, when you become an accomplice, you got to get in the fight. That's another thing that's in my first book, State of Emergency. But anyway, you know, and I know that they had to have those backroom conversations and said, we got to stop this shit. Like this woke thing is becoming an issue where even our kids are becoming indoctrinated.
And they're bold enough to have a not backdoor conversation. They're going to have it for the world to see.
Right.
You ain't going to do that.
You're not going to do it. We're going to shut it down. But they won't, because we always find
That's right.
our people have been we're teaching in the field.
When it was illegal to learn to read.
They were teaching in the
Shit.
fields, okay? They were the women and the men and the
right.
scholars of our community,
That's
the kings
right.
and the queens. They were teaching in the fields through song. They were teaching through the way that they cooked. They were teaching
That's right.
quietly. They taught in the Underground Railroad.
Imagine
they taught
how much habit.
everywhere that they could find space to learn.
And it's deep. Some of our best teachers were non-traditional teachers.
Absolutely.
If think about
This
I
is
couldn't
fine.
imagine the amount of people Harry had been taught taking you to wherever you needed to go.
Absolutely.
Malcolm did not learn in the traditional sense. He learned actually in jail, right? And even Dr.
Wow.
John Henry Clark had about a third, sixth grade education. But because he knew so much and his pool of wisdom was so vast, this is the doctor. He didn't learn it and get it into through traditional institutions, but this is still a doctor here.
One that was brilliant.
And that's what we've had to do, given the state of affairs that we encounter in America.
And so here we are.
You gonna learn it.
Until freedom. Check us out. Peace.